Imagine stepping into a royal banquet, only to realize the host is about to make a decision that changes everything. The hall is overflowing with guests, packed to the brim with people who were standing on dusty street corners just an hour ago. They are eating a king's lavish feast at a royal table, celebrating the wedding of a royal prince they have never even met. Nobody checked their background, nobody asked for their references, and nobody cared about their past credentials. The massive iron gates were thrown wide open, allowing the respectable and the disreputable to walk in side by side. The rich aroma of roasted meat hangs heavy in the air, accompanied by fine wine and joyous music. Loud laughter echoes off the stone walls as ordinary beggars marvel at their unbelievable stroke of fortune. Then the king enters the grand banqueting hall, slowly walking between the long tables to inspect his newly gathered guests. But what happens next in this ancient hall will completely shatter your expectations. His eyes scan the crowd until he suddenly stops dead in his tracks before one specific man sitting at the table. This man was not one of the violent rebels who destroyed the original invitations or harmed the royal messengers. He was simply a guest who walked in, sat down, and began enjoying the royal feast, just like everyone else around him. The king approaches him and asks a quiet question that carries immense, terrifying weight. How did you manage to enter this royal hall without wearing the proper wedding garment? The man's complete silence in response to that simple question holds the entire secret of this ancient parable. Most people skip right past this pivotal detail on their way to more comfortable parts of the story. This famous parable is not merely about getting inside the doors, because everyone ultimately received an invitation. The entire story turns on what you are wearing when the sovereign ruler finally looks directly at you. Have you ever wondered why this one detail completely changes the meaning of the entire lesson? To truly grasp the gravity of this moment, we must understand where Jesus was standing when he spoke these words. It was the final week of his earthly life, teaching in the crowded temple courts of Jerusalem under heavy scrutiny. Surrounding him were religious leaders who had already firmly decided to have him eliminated. This was not a peaceful sermon on a grassy hillside, but an intense confrontation in the most sacred space. Jesus fires 3 consecutive parables at these hostile leaders, each one sharper and more direct than the last. When he begins speaking about a grand wedding feast, every single person in the crowd leans in closely. In ancient culture, a wedding was not a brief evening affair, but a multi-day marathon of immense community joy. To be left off the guest list was a public shame, while receiving an invitation was a prized honor. To reject a royal invitation from the king himself was not a scheduling conflict, but an act of betrayal. Yet when the king sends his servants to call the invited guests, they flatly refuse to attend the banquet. He sends a second wave of messengers, explaining that the oxen are slaughtered and everything is fully prepared. Instead of showing gratitude, the invited guests show total indifference and return to their farms and businesses. Some even seize the king's messengers, humiliating them publicly and treating them with extreme harshness. The king responds with swift judgment upon those hostile rebels, but the wedding feast itself will not be cancelled. Pay close attention, because this next command turns the entire royal decree completely upside down. The king issues a revolutionary command to his servants to go out to the main highways and invite absolutely everyone. The servants gather everyone they find along the roads, bringing in both the bad and the good indiscriminately. The grand hall is instantly filled with guests who had no prior expectation or merit to sit at a royal table. The wide scope of this invitation represents the boundless grace offered to those whom society had completely written off. Yet, as the feast gets underway, the king notices a man wearing his ordinary, everyday street clothing. This raises a vital question that scholars and thinkers have pondered for centuries regarding this story. How could a poor beggar pulled off the dusty street on short notice possibly own proper royal wedding attire? The answer lies in the lavish customs of ancient royal banquets, where the host provided the garments. The king himself supplied clean, elegant robes at the entrance door for every single guest who entered. This generous provision leveled the playing field, ensuring that poverty would never embarrass anyone at the table. Therefore, wearing the provided robe honored the host, while refusing it was a direct insult to the king. The man without a wedding garment was not a helpless victim of bad timing or sudden poverty. He was a man who stood at the door, looked at the king's free provision, and actively chose to reject it. What would make someone turn down a priceless gift at the very threshold of royalty? He walked past the open hands of the royal servants, trusting that his own clothes were good enough for the king. When the king addresses him, he uses a specific term that carries a chilling distance in the original language. He addresses him as friend, a word reserved in this record exclusively for those who are in the wrong. It is the exact same word used later to address Judas Iscariot in the garden during the ultimate betrayal. When asked how he entered without the garment, the man stands completely speechless before the sovereign ruler. His mouth is effectively muzzled because every conceivable excuse has already been stripped away by the king's generosity. He cannot claim ignorance, lack of time, or inability to afford what was offered entirely for free. He wanted to enjoy the king's lavish feast, but strictly on his own terms and in his own self-made clothing. This parable guards against two dangerous misconceptions that people frequently fall into today. It does not mean you must be inherently good enough to earn your place, for the hall was filled with bad people. Nor does it mean that your condition upon entering does not matter at all to the one who invited you. But wait, where else in history do we see this exact same pattern repeating itself? Throughout the vast narrative of Scripture, clothing consistently represents one's spiritual standing before God. In the Garden of Eden, human beings sewed fragile fig leaves to cover their sudden realization of nakedness. Human effort was utterly insufficient, so God himself made garments of skin to cover them properly. In the visions of the prophets, filthy rags are removed and replaced with rich, clean garments provided by God. Isaiah rejoices that God has clothed his people in garments of salvation and wrapped them in a robe of righteousness. In the final book of Revelation, the bride is granted clean, bright linen to wear for the ultimate marriage supper. The consistent biblical rule is that the only covering that stands in God's presence is the one he provides. Our self-manufactured righteousness and prideful achievements will never endure the scrutiny of the king. Think about how easy it is to fall into this exact same trap in our own lives today. Imagine standing at the royal doorway where a servant holds out a pristine, beautifully folded garment for you. A weary traveler takes the robe and covers his dust-stained clothes, instantly fitting in with the royal court. A penniless beggar receives the same robe and suddenly looks as dignified as any prince in the hall. The free robe erases every social barrier, past failure, and status distinction among the gathered guests. Yet one man looks at the offered robe, looks down at his own attire, and arrogantly waves the servant away. He sits among the guests, feeling comfortable and secure, until the king himself walks into the light. In that decisive moment, his quiet decision to trust his own outfit becomes his ultimate downfall. This story confronts us with a deeply personal question about what we are truly relying on today. Many people have accepted the general invitation, attending communities and sitting at the metaphorical table. The hidden danger lies in quietly trusting our own decency, moral record, or good reputation as our covering. We subtly assume that our own efforts are sufficient to grant us belonging in the presence of the king. Yet the warning of the parable is clear. Only the covering provided by the host will stand on that day. The extraordinary good news buried in this solemn warning is that the royal robe remains entirely free. It is held out at the door to everyone, regardless of their past background or former failures. Nobody at that magnificent feast earned their garment, and, remarkably, nobody was expected to pay for it. The only person removed from the grand celebration was the one who refused to accept what was offered. Could this be the single most important decision a person can make? The invitation comes down to a humble choice to stop defending our own flawed, self-made garments. Jesus concludes with the famous declaration that many are called, but few are ultimately chosen. This does not depict a stingy deity restricting access, for the call went out to every highway and byway. The invitation was as broad as humanly possible, filling the entire hall with diverse people from all walks of life. The chosen ones are simply those who humbly received the king's free provision instead of insisting on their own. The calling reaches everyone without distinction, but the clothing must be accepted by a willing heart. The sovereign king eagerly desires to cover anyone who is willing to put off their own self-righteousness. He levels the rich and the poor alike with the exact same glorious robe of grace and righteousness. Everything necessary for the great banquet has already been fully prepared by the host. The feast is set, the royal son is honored, and the open door remains available to all who approach. The only remaining question is whether we will accept his robe or attempt to stand in our own. Do not let self-reliance rob you of the ultimate joy prepared for those who humbly accept his gift. Step through the doorway, receive the free garment of righteousness, and take your seat at the royal table. This single lesson reveals why so many miss the true point of this famous ancient story. When you look closely at the ancient customs, the generosity of the king becomes overwhelming. Every single guest was treated with the exact same level of honor the moment they put on the robe. The beggar was no longer defined by his poverty, and the wealthy merchant could not boast of his status. Everyone matched because everyone was clothed by the exact same royal benefactor. That is why refusing the garment was not just a fashion mistake, but in rejection of the king's hospitality. It was saying that one's own identity was superior to the gift being offered at the door. How often do we quietly cling to our own self-worth instead of receiving true grace? The parable forces us to reevaluate what it means to be truly prepared for the final gathering. Being present in the room is not the same as being properly covered by the host. The silence of the man proves that when truth is revealed, self-justification vanishes instantly. There are no arguments to make when the gift was freely placed right before your eyes. The invitation is an ongoing call to humility, trust, and complete reliance on royal generosity. Look at the beauty of an invitation that excludes no one based on their former condition. The good and the bad were both welcomed in, breaking all social expectations of that era. Grace does not demand that you clean yourself up before you approach the royal gates. It offers the clean garment at the threshold, so you can walk inside fully prepared. What a powerful truth for anyone who has ever felt unworthy to enter a sacred space. You do not need to construct your own perfection when the ruler provides his own perfection for you. The entire banquet is a celebration of the prince, not a showcase for the guest's personal achievements. When we focus on the prince, accepting the robe becomes the most natural and joyful choice. To wear the garment is to honor the prince and participate fully in his magnificent celebration. To reject it is to try to make the celebration about oneself and one's own appearance. This subtle shift in focus is what determines whether one remains at the feast or is cast out. Are you ready to let go of your self-made garments and receive what is freely given? The doors remain open, and the servants are still extending the royal invitation to all who listen. The atmosphere inside the hall is filled with unspeakable joy, unity, and endless celebration. No one inside is looking at another guest's past because all eyes are on the beauty of the prince. The shared garment creates a harmonious community bound together by a single generous act. It removes all grounds for boasting, comparison, and division among those sitting at the tables. Every guest shares the exact same debt of gratitude to the ruler who welcomed them in. Consider how transformative this perspective is for our understanding of faith and belonging. Belonging is not something we earn through tireless effort or social standing. It is a gift received with open hands and a grateful heart at the very entry point. The parable stands as a timeless beacon, guiding us away from self-sufficiency toward pure grace. It reminds us that our highest virtue is simply accepting what the ruler has accomplished for us. When the king walks through the room, he looks for the mark of his own provision on each guest. He looks to see if we have trusted his word and worn the robe he provided at such great cost. The tragedy of the speechless man is that he was so close to full joy, yet missed it through pride. He sat at the table, smelled the feast, heard the music, yet missed the true blessing. Let that solemn lesson resonate deeply as we consider our own standing today. The contrast between self-righteousness and received grace could not be drawn more clearly. One leads to complete speechlessness and loss, while the other leads to eternal fellowship. The king's heart is not to exclude, but to see his banquet hall filled with joyful covered guests. He went to the furthest lengths, sending servants to every highway to ensure no seat was empty. The abundance of the feast is matched only by the infinite depth of the ruler's generosity. Will you accept the invitation on the terms of the one who prepared the magnificent banquet? Take off the worn-out garments of self-reliance and put on the pristine robe of grace today. Step into the joy of the prince's celebration with a heart full of gratitude and trust. The table is set, the feast is ready, and the free garment is waiting for you at the door. Receive the gift, honor the king, and enjoy the royal wedding banquet forever.